Pablo Escobar. This guy wasn't just a drug lord, he was practically a head of state. At his peak, the Medellin cartel controlled 80% of the global cocaine trade, making him one of the richest men alive. He owned private armies, bought judges, and even got himself elected to Colombia's Congress. But by December 1993, the walls were closing in. The Colombian government, backed by the DEA, had formed a special unit called Search Block, specifically to hunt him down. Los Pepis, a vigilante group made up of his enemies, was systematically killing his associates and bombing his properties. On December 2nd, Escobar made a fatal mistake. He used a radio to call his son, and Colombian intelligence traced the signal to a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin. Search Block surrounded the house within minutes. Escobar tried to escape across the rooftops with his bodyguard, but he was overweight and out of shape from years of hiding. As he ran across the red clay tiles, sniper bullets found their mark. He died on that rooftop, wearing a simple blue shirt and jeans, a far cry from the luxury he'd known. The man who once offered to pay Colombia's entire national debt was killed by his own government, ending the most violent chapter in the country's history. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, he earned the nickname Lord of the Skies because he used a fleet of Boeing 727s to transport cocaine from Colombia to Mexico. By the mid-1990s, he was moving more drugs than anyone in history and had amassed a fortune worth $25 billion. But Carrillo had a problem. He was too recognizable. Mexican authorities were closing in, and he needed to disappear. His solution? Extensive plastic surgery to completely change his appearance. On July 4th, 1997, Carrillo checked into a private clinic in Mexico City under a false name. The plan was simple: reshape his face, get liposuction, and emerge as a completely different person. He'd hired the best plastic surgeons money could buy and paid them millions to ensure their silence. The surgery lasted over 8 hours, but something went wrong during the procedure. Whether it was an anesthetic reaction, surgical complications, or something more sinister, Carrillo's heart stopped on the operating table. The man who had cheated death countless times was killed by his own vanity. The most powerful drug lord in Mexico died trying to get a nose job. His surgeons? They were found tortured and murdered in metal drums a few months later, their bodies showing signs of extensive torture. The message was clear, like even in death, Carrillo's organization didn't tolerate failure. Griselda Blanco. She pioneered the cocaine trade in Miami during the 1970s and 80s. Known as the cocaine godmother, she was responsible for hundreds of murders and created the template for modern drug trafficking. She was also completely paranoid, which kept her alive longer than most. After serving nearly 20 years in U.S. prisons, Blanco was deported to Colombia in 2004. She tried to live quietly in Medellin, but you can't just retire from the drug game. Too many people had scores to settle. On September 3rd, 2012, the 69-year-old Blanco was leaving a butcher shop in Medellin with her pregnant daughter-in-law when a motorcycle pulled up. The passenger, a young man in a helmet, calmly walked over and shot her twice in the head. It was a classic Sicario hit, quick, efficient, and brutal. The same method she'd used to kill countless rivals decades earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had perfected the motorcycle assassination was killed by her own innovation. Blanco had survived wars with Pablo Escobar, hit decades in American prisons, and countless assassination attempts. But she couldn't survive a trip to buy meat for dinner. Joaquin El Chapo. El Chapo breaks the pattern here because he's one of the few major drug lords who's still alive, but barely. The head of the Sinaloa cartel became famous for his elaborate prison escapes, including a mile-long tunnel complete with lighting and ventilation. But his downfall came from the most modern of weaknesses: technology and ego. In 2014, while hiding in the mountains of Sinaloa, Chapo made contact with Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo and American actor Sean Penn for a potential movie about his life. The communications were intercepted by Mexican intelligence, who used the metadata to track his location. When they finally raided his hideout in Los Mochis in January 2016, Chapo escaped through a tunnel system but was captured later that day, soaking wet and exhausted. His final escape attempt came through the legal system. He was extradited to the United States in 2017, where he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. He's currently in ADX Florence, America's most secure prison, spending 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Frank Lucas. This guy became famous for smuggling heroin from Southeast Asia in the coffins of American soldiers during the Vietnam War. His story was romanticized in the movie American Gangster, but the reality was much grimmer. Unlike other drug lords, Lucas actually survived long enough to die of natural causes. After serving 15 years in federal prison, he was released in 1991 and tried to live quietly. But the drug game had changed, and there was no place for an old-school heroin dealer in the crack era. On May 30th, 2019, Lucas died in Cedar Grove, New Jersey at age 88. He was in a wheelchair, suffering from the effects of a car accident years earlier. The man who once controlled Harlem's drug trade with an iron fist died peacefully in his sleep, but Lucas's quiet death was an anomaly. Most drug lords don't get to die in their beds surrounded by family. They die violently, betrayed by their own organizations or hunted down by law enforcement. Arturo Beltran Leva. He was the head of the Beltran-Leva cartel and one of Mexico's most violent drug lords. He was known for his lavish lifestyle, wearing $1,000 shirts and carrying diamond-encrusted weapons. His downfall came from a split with his former partners in the Sinaloa cartel. When his brother was arrested in 2008, Beltran Leva blamed El Chapo for betraying him to authorities. The resulting war turned Mexico into a battleground. On December 16, 2009, Mexican Marines surrounded Beltran Leva's luxury apartment in Cuernavaca. The ensuing gunfight lasted over 2 hours, with cartel gunmen firing from multiple floors of the building. When the smoke cleared, Beltran Leva was found dead in the master bedroom, wearing designer jeans and a polo shirt. His body was covered in $100 bills, either as a final gesture of defiance or placed there by his men as a tribute. The Mexican government displayed his body to the media, blood-soaked bills still scattered around the corpse. It was a message. No matter how much money you have, no matter how many men you command, the state will eventually find you. Carlos Leder. Carlos Leder is another major drug lord who's still alive today. He was Pablo Escobar's partner and the man who turned the Bahamas into a cocaine transshipment point. Unlike other drug lords, Leder was a true ideologue who believed he was fighting a war against American imperialism. But Leder made a crucial mistake. He became too visible. He bought an entire island in the Bahamas and threw lavish parties with celebrities and politicians. He even started his own political party in Colombia, campaigning on anti-American themes. In 1987, Colombian authorities arrested Leder and extradited him to the United States, the first major drug lord to be sent to America for trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, Leder made a deal. He agreed to testify against Manuel Noriega, the Panamanian dictator, in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation led to his release in 2020, and he was deported to Germany. Leder didn't die in a shootout or from a rival's bullet. He survived by becoming the one thing drug lords are never supposed to be: a snitch. He traded his honor for his life, and somehow it worked. Felix Gallardo. Miguel Angel. Felix Gallardo was known as El Padrino, the godfather of Mexican drug trafficking. He unified the country's scattered drug organizations into a single cartel and established the modern Mexican drug trade. But Gallardo's downfall came from the most American of crimes: the torture and murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena in 1985. The killing brought the full weight of the U.S. government down on Mexican drug trafficking. Gallardo was arrested in 1989 and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Unlike other drug lords, he wasn't killed by rivals or law enforcement. Instead, he's dying slowly in Mexican prisons, forgotten by a new generation of traffickers. Now in his 70s, Gallardo is partially deaf and blind, suffering from various health problems. He's been denied parole multiple times and will likely die in prison. The man who created the modern Mexican drug trade is ending his life as a forgotten old man in a cell. Kungaw. Kungaw controlled the Golden Triangle, the opium-producing region where Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos meet. At his peak, he commanded a 20,000-man army and controlled 70% of the world's heroin supply. But Kungaw was different from other drug lords. He was also an ethnic Shan nationalist fighting for independence from Myanmar. This gave him a level of legitimacy that purely criminal organizations lacked. In 1996, facing pressure from both the Myanmar government and Thai authorities, Kungaw made an unprecedented decision. He surrendered. He negotiated a deal with Myanmar's military government, disbanding his army in exchange for amnesty. Kungaw spent his final years living quietly in Yangon, Myanmar's largest city. He died of natural causes in 2007, one of the few major drug lords to successfully retire from the business. His surrender marked the end of an era. The Golden Triangle's dominance in the global heroin trade was over, replaced by Afghan opium and Mexican fentanyl. Did you enjoy this breakdown? Then please subscribe and hit that bell button or more.